more things aren't effective than are, and the search is still on. What I want to do with the second part of this talk is talk about the recent, I won't call them recent advances in science because they're not recent advances, it's the recent rediscovery of critically important scientific information which will shed light on the nature of cancer and therefore its rational treatment. Now, the things that we've regrettably given up in our clinic as ineffective is intravenous vitamin C. Now, firstly, I'm a total sort of Linus Pauling supporter for very credible biochemical reasons, and in the treatment of viral illnesses and just general wellness, vitamin C is absolutely important, and everyone should really, in my opinion, be having 3 to 5 grams a day as a minimum. But using high-dose vitamin C intravenously, in my experience, and we've given it a reasonable shape, is really not an avenue I actually pursue anymore. And the same goes with apricot kernels. Things like hypothermia. We've had a lot of patients who've gone to the German clinics and spent $20,000 to $40,000 getting a whole raft of different treatments, including hyperbaric oxygen, hypothermia, insulin sort of assisted chemotherapy. There's this range of things that they're doing with various results, but they're spending the money and 6 months later they're in our clinic looking for pain relief, so it's not a great recommendation for those modalities. It seems like if you combine different modalities, you can get some sort of benefit, and whether that benefit's short-term or long-term depends on a lot of factors. And the trouble with cancer, a lot of the cancers we deal with, if they were left alone, they would probably not progress. That certainly applies to many prostate cancers and some breast cancers. And the trouble is, if they're using routine mammography, say, to find a breast cancer, they may be operating on tumours that were never a danger at all. So they inflate the quality of their results by treating women that didn't need them at all. That's a bit of a worry. But what I want to do in this talk is actually talk about the science of cancer, because I am as guilty as sort of the next line of being deluded for decades that the cancer is actually a genetic disease and that the genes are predominantly responsible for the behaviour, for the causation and the behaviour of cancer. It turns out it couldn't be further from the truth. And I make no apologies for giving a little bit of science here, because if you understand this basic science, you can apply it better to how you live your life, and the result of that will be increased wellness. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to discuss its causes and treatment. Okay, thanks, Liz. Now, basically, when you come down to the science of it, there's two competing theories. One is called the somatic mutation theory, and the other is called the metabolic theory. Now, the somatic mutation theory is the one that is currently accepted by practically every practitioner in this country, minus about 5 or 6 of the little goats that are sort of named from the sidelines. But I'll go through it with you and present the evidence that's led to that thing. Next one, please. Okay, we've got to know some really basic biology, but it's really, really, really basic. This is a diagram of a typical nucleated cell. Right? There's cells without nucleus called prokaryotes, and there's cells with nuclei called eukaryotes. This is a nucleated cell. And the only 3 things I want to pay attention to are the nucleus, where all the DNA and the genes are, the cytoplasm, which is everything else around there containing all the organelles, and these little yellow little squiggles, these shorter ones, called mitochondria. Now, this is where it gets really, really strange. It turns out, we'll have the next slide if you don't mind. This is a mitochondria, or mitochondria plural. It turns out it is an endosymbiotic bacteria fused with a cell. Now that's a mouthful, but listen to this. With modern DNA analysis, it's now been clearly established that the mitochondria, our little energy components of our cell, actually took up residence. So like germs that took up residence in an animal cell. So before this fusion took place, an animal cell, not necessarily an animal cell, I should say a nucleated cell, because these are probably one-cell organisms, the nucleated cell could only ferment glucose. Now, most energy comes from glucose. When you ferment glucose, you just split it in half and you derive 2 energy molecules from each glucose. That's the way the cell used to do it. Then these little modified bacteria took up residence, and therefore, and how malignant behaviour was. So that massively expensive exercise in sequencing hundreds of tumours resulted in profound evidence against the theory. So you know what their response was? Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the genome atlas because it doesn't suit us. Next one, Sid. The thing, though, that really put the knife in the heart of the somatic mutation theory is a very, very elegant expression called the nuclear transfer experiment. Now here, for diagrammatic purposes, we have a normal cell with its normal nucleus and normal expression of oncogene drivers, if you want to call it that, on the surface. Over here on your right, we have a cancerous nucleus with an overexpression of oncogene drivers. Now, if the somatic mutation theory was correct, what they did, they used micropipettes to suck the nucleus out of a cancer cell and suck the nucleus out of a normal cell and reverse them. Right? Now, if the somatic mutation theory was right, the nasty cancer nucleus would make this cell, this chimera cell, into a cancer cell when you injected it into mice, but it didn't. None of them became cancerous. But when you took a normal nucleus and put it with the cancer mitochondria, 99% of those cells became cancerous when they were injected into mice. Okay, next one. They've got a bit out of order. Just a bit out. Just next one. That's okay. The metabolic theory of cancer. Now, most people have heard of Otto Warburg, I'm sure, but I'm not sure if many people just understand how brilliant the work he did was. Now, what Otto did way back in 1927, and it wasn't that easy to do quality microscopic research because you had to build your own equipment and stuff like that. It was quite amazing. But the work goes back to 1927, for which he was awarded a Nobel Prize, and it's called the Warburg effect. Right? And that's what they've named it. But what it is basically is a proof that the fundamental defect in cancer is mitochondrial failure with transition from oxidative respiration or oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria to fermentation of glucose in the cytoplasm. So in every cancer that Warburg studied, what they found was it had reverted back to its primitive old form before the bacteria had moved in. So the furnace, instead of burning hot and bright with no residue, was now smouldering with fermentation and the production of a lot of lactic acid within the cell. Now, everyone has heard this business about alkalising your body. And in a sense, there's some element of truth in it, but you can't alkalise the inside of a cancer cell by taking bicarb into your stomach. Right? And that's another one of those painful and stupid fallacies that people sort of rely on for treatment. But there is acidity in the cancer cell, but it's within the cell, because it has a failed energy metabolism and it's relying on primitive fermentation in the cytoplasm. Now, you can count them. A normal cell has 1,500 mitochondria. Most cancer cells have about half that number, and a lot of the survivors aren't morphologically normal. They don't have a normal shape. Okay, see? Now, what causes the cancerous behaviour in the cells? We've already said there's a loss of mitochondrial function or a mitochondrial failure. Then there's energy derived by fermentation in the cytoplasm, generation of lactic acid with increasing acidosis, dysregulation of the nuclear DNA by the acidosis, and the failure of mitochondrial fueled apoptosis to delete the cell. Now, I'll just tell you about that. You've perhaps all heard of the term apoptosis. Is that familiar with you? It's basically an energy-dependent form of cell suicide. Now, the body has some exquisite self-regulating factors. Right? When a cell goes bad, when it has a mutation or something like that, the cell has this capacity to pull the plug on itself. It's called apoptosis. And what happens, there's a burst of energy from the mitochondria, and the valves that hold the cytoplasm in are opened, and the fluid, or the sap of the cell, is actually pumped out, and the cell contracts to little granules, which are then taken up by the scavenger cells and recycled. So it's a beautifully elegant process for getting rid of damaged cells. But if the damage to your cell is to the mitochondria, even though the cell is abnormal, it can't delete itself because it doesn't have enough energy potential from the fermentation. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay, next one please. You don't have to get it all at once. The idea will sink in. Okay, so what do we do about it? Right, now, every time I talk about cancer, you have to give more than lip service to prevention, because in every shape and form, it's much easier to prevent a cancer than to treat it. And most cancers, I won't say all, but most cancers can be positively impacted by diet and lifestyle and prevention. And that's probably fairly well known to most people. Fasting is really the only modality that's been studied repeatedly and shown to have a positive and reproducible effect on cancer. And the theory behind the fasting is that as you deprive yourself of glucose, the fat reserves in your body are mobilised and they form ketone bodies. And your normal cells can transit to ketone fuel, including the brain, whereas cancer cells can't. They're dependent on glucose. Now, most people here would have heard of a PET scan. The PET scan? Positron emission tomography. What it is basically, the patient gets given an injection of radioactive glucose and told to rest for a while. It circulates in the body and is preferentially sucked into cancer cells because they need to take 12 times more glucose to get the same amount of energy as a normal cell. So PET scans are used routinely in clinical practice, but the doctors won't make that huge leap to say, why do PET scans work? Why are they giving donuts to people in radiation oncology? Why do they say in the children's onco ward it's okay to eat lollies and sweets? It's just nonsense, knowing they must know about the Warburg effect. They must know about the dependence of cancers on sugar, but they choose to just ignore that. Now, unfortunately, fasting is far more arduous than most people can endure, especially in our bloated, sort of Western spoiled country. So the next best thing is calorie restriction. And there is total, unequivocal, repeatable evidence that moderate, it doesn't have to be harsh, moderate calorie restriction has an enormous preventative role in cancer. So they've got cancer-prone rats, and there's plenty of those species. You put them on calorie-restricted diet, you know, you can halve the incidence of the cancers, not subtle changes. And remember, a pharmaceutical drug is considered saleable if you get something like a 20% reduction in the size of the cancer. That's all you need to do. It doesn't matter how long it lasts or anything like that. You can call it a responding drug. It's a bit sad. Okay, calorie restriction. A ketogenic diet, and that's a very misunderstood term. Strictly speaking, any ketogenic, and there's many different forms of it, the ketogenic diet is any diet that more or less excludes glucose and carbohydrate. So you transit to ketone physiology fairly quickly. We're designing a nutritive ketogenic diet because my experience with ketogenic diets is provided by hospitals, and they're often in the form of a powder, like ketocal and things like that. After 2 years on them, the children that we use it on are in tragic nutritional states, often with severe osteoporosis and a whole lot of other problems. So the form of the ketogenic diet is very important. There are a couple of drugs that have been around for a long time, have been tried experimentally in cancer. One of these is bromopyruvate, and that relies directly on interacting with the metabolic lesion of the mitochondria. But unfortunately, to be effective, it has to be given intravenously or even via intra-arterial delivery. And it's really beyond the capacity of most researchers, certainly including ourselves. There's another chemical I want to talk about, which is dichloroacetate. Acetic acid, as you may know as vinegar, this is basically vinegar that's had 2 hydrogen atoms replaced by 2 chlorine atoms. And as such, it now inhibits, could we have the next slide please? It now inhibits an enzyme by the name of pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase. And it's very interesting that I find myself doing kinase inhibition work just at a time when they've sort of hit the headlines in other ways, like the tyrosine kinase inhibitors for the treatment of CML. But it's quite an interesting development generally. Now, this mitochondria, part of its failure, remember I said there's a reduced number and the ones that are present are damaged. Now, they're damaged for a number of reasons, and this is important as to how you're going to look after yourselves. They're damaged, firstly, because most people don't eat the right fats and lipids over their lifetime. And bit by bit, you can't make a cell membrane that's healthy and vibrant if your food that you're eating is not healthy and vibrant. Right? You can't make an A-grade body out of only McDonald's hamburgers or something like that. It's just not possible because the essential lipids just aren't there. That's one thing. Next thing, because they're the centre of metabolism, they're the furnace, they're most easily damaged by free radicals. Right? So if you don't have a large amount of readily available antioxidants, and that includes both the antioxidants that are built into your body like glutathione, and the antioxidants you take in like vitamin C and E and all those other things, if you don't have the right amount, you damage your mitochondria. And if you damage them to the point of where they pack up, right, your cell will go acidic, your nuclear DNA will be dysregulated, and you'll get cancer. Cancer is basically a metabolic disease, not a genetic disease. The billions of dollars that are being spent in this country and this world are chasing ghosts that they know aren't there. It's a very sad state of affairs. I have just started doing some work with dichloroacetate, and it's too early to actually report whether we're going to have an effect. But based on two things, we reasonably expect to have an effect here. Firstly, there was some work done in Canada in 2007 by Evangelos Michaelakis. He was a Canadian cardiologist who was experimenting with DCA for the treatment of pulmonary hypertension. DCA is a simple, relatively non-toxic chemical that's been used to treat metabolic disorders like congenital lactic acidosis for many decades. So it's not a drug without experience. We don't have to do safety tests. We know what the dose is and all the rest of it. Evangelos, for reasons we're not sure of, decided to give it to a cage full of rats with cancer. Just put it in their drinking water and watch them. And to the researchers' amazement, the cancer started to go away. So they did some limited tests on patients, and from all accounts, they got very good results in about 6 weeks of dosing with a manageable side effect profile. But the next thing we hear, all their funding is gone, and they're sort of hawking themselves around looking for funding to continue the studies. It's a bit of a sad state of affairs. I feel that if we're to make progress against cancer, and it's very clear to me now, the cancer that we're seeing in the clinics now is rather much more aggressive than the cancers that appeared in the 70s. The interval between it first appearing and the number of people who are presenting with widely spread metastatic disease is quite alarming, right? It's not a little grass fire, it's like a forest fire that's burning. So the take-home message for prevention is you need a rainbow diet, you need a lot of antioxidants, and the more natural you get them, the better. There are a lot of fraudulent therapies, and whilst many of them have some value, nutritively and in other ways, they don't really have the punch that'll take an advanced cancer out. And that also applies to cannabis, and I'll just finish with a few words on cannabis in the treatment of cancer. Now, firstly, I've found cannabis to be of inestimable value in the management of cancer. From time to time, I've even seen advanced cancers regress under cannabis therapy, but I've also seen them relapse. And the way I now interpret that situation is using cannabis in the Rick Simpson method, i.e. very, very high doses in a concentrated form like that, is actually using cannabis as a drug rather than as a body balancing herb. And you can get a good drug effect, but it doesn't mean that the cancer can't become resistant to that particular pathway that the cannabis is acting on, because it's probably acting in similar ways to her and the ADG and things like that. It's acting downstream, that's why it has a temporary effect. It has a great effect on managing the symptoms. and getting people off the narcotic drugs, because the evidence is quite clear that once you're started on the morphine, that's like throwing kerosene on your fire. Right? So the doctors now are very happy to hand out Oxycontin, and it really is like a pill mill out there. I can't believe the amount of Oxycontin that's going out the door. But it's also clear that not only does radiation and chemotherapy generate resistant cancer cells and make the whole cancer harder to treat, the way they treat them. And they basically give you your full quota of chemo. When the cancer comes back, you're hooked into a palliative care system, given a sublethal dose of morphine and told to go home and die, basically. It's not a very good system, and if we had honest data, you'd actually find there's one paper written by doctors from the North Shore Hospital that showed that the overall benefit to chemo generally in all the patients they'd studied in the meta-analysis was something like 2%. Right? It extended your life by 2%. A modern drug, Katelaris, one of these wonder fused antibody drugs with a cytotoxic on it. So instead of just injecting the cytotoxic drug into your veins, they link it up to an antibody which theoretically targets the tumour at the HER receptor. Remember that cancer cell with the little sticks on it? It hooks onto that. It makes a difference to people's lives. Without it, the average life expectancy was 15 months. With it, the life expectancy is 22 months. Right? And that last 7 months is spent usually in and out of hospital with complications and things. We're in the hands of con merchants and scammers, right, at all different levels, and it's a big worry. What else have I got to say? A few little political issues, right? That's enough on the science. A few little political issues. There's been a lot of talk about medical cannabis, but I've said at these meetings before, the only true way to actually assess whether any program is working is count up how many people have received medicine and as a result received benefit. That's the way you measure the success of a project, isn't it? How many? It's zero. It's absolutely zero. So we've got an Office of Drug Control, we've got all these bureaucrats, we've got lawyers working on it. They're spending millions of dollars. Sydney Uni is sitting on $34 million. They've done nothing with it. The whole thing is in a disgraceful abyss, because in my impression, that's the way it's intended. It will never come to anything of value the way it's going, because Malcolm Turnbull has chosen to put medical cannabis under the control of the TGA, and as such, it becomes inaccessible to anyone other than a large corporate entity who has no real interest in exploiting the full benefit of cannabis. Right? They don't treat it the way it should. When we treat epileptic children, for instance, I mean, we have formed some sort of relationship with them and their family, so we get an idea of where they fit in and what's going on, and then we give a gentle dose titration. In these trials they've been doing, they've been slugging these kids with doses that are like 10 and 20 times higher than what we found effective. And then they list drowsiness as a side effect. It really is a nightmare out there, and there's repeated evidence of scientific obfuscation, if not just downright fraud. And on that cheerful note, I'll end the talk and take some questions. I'm told there's no microphone, so just yell out your question and I'll repeat it.
So it sounds like you would be sort of promoting the use of CBD for strengthening your body's defence systems. Is that right?
No, definitely not. I'm certainly not supporting single-use cannabinoids at all. When you say CBD, if you say we're using a balanced combination of THC, CBD and possibly other cannabinoids depending on the particular indication, yes, but we're definitely resolutely opposed to single therapy with CBD. So if your question referred to CBD dominant whole plant extract, yes, there'd be an enthusiastic yes to that, but saying CBD, absolutely not. Yeah.
Just a question. We've been sort of following the research of protocol, but to my mum here, she has struggled to get past the dosage required. But we've also seen the video from Sharon Kelly where she talks about using that backdoor method. I'm just wondering whether your thoughts are that would be more effective
Okay. Just reference back to what I was saying before, in the Rick Simpson method. Oh, right, the question was, he's managing a person with advanced cancer and they're struggling to take the full Rick Simpson protocol. And the question was, where's the role of suppositories and all that? Okay, now, I said earlier in the talk that you can use cannabis as either a balancing agent or for the removal of other pharmaceuticals. And you can also use it as a drug directly against cancer, and that, I think, is a strategy for Rick Simpson. By getting into very high levels, you trigger particular pathways. But, I mean, Sharon Kelly had a brilliant response and then relapsed. You're aware of that? And it's very interesting, right? See, this is the trouble. I mean, I've seen on the internet people I've interacted with, and I know they did poorly, and you know, it's sort of brave Aussie mum beats breast cancer with cannabis, and I knew she died. You know, there's a lot of nonsense out there. I'm putting a lot more of my effort and focus into metabolic therapies than the cannabis, and I'm using the cannabis in much smaller doses, because even if you get a good response, right, you can't rely on that to last, because the cancer is constantly mutating. So we have to focus it at a target that doesn't mutate. And what doesn't change is the dicked up mitochondria. Okay.
So why use cannabis at all? What benefits do you...
What does it add to the treatment?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. I mean, I don't push it on people. And during consultations, people have looked at me after we've discussed their diet and their lifestyle for an hour and other things. And what about the pot, Doc? I said, oh, well, you know, what's your need? Or what's your desire? What I'm finding too, with regard to cannabis, it must relate to some physiology in the people. It suits about a third of the population down to the ground, right? It gives benefit to about a third, and the other third are a bit indifferent, right? So it's not an automatic part of the treatment. It can be used to ameliorate the damage of conventional therapies like radiation and cytotoxic if that becomes necessary. It can manage the side effects like chronic peripheral neuropathy from some of the cytotoxics. Certainly appetite stimulation, especially substitution of narcotics and their other poisons, the weird stuff that they put people on. Right? So it has a place, it has a big place, but it's probably tertiary to diet, lifestyle, metabolic therapy and supportive therapy. That's the way I currently see it. That may change with time.
Metabolic therapy, is that the ketogenic program?
Unfortunately, I've made the probable observation. Oh, what was the question? The question was, where's the role of the ketogenic diet? I'm increasingly seeing...
I'm asking what do you mean by the metabolic...
Well, in this instance, it's the experiment we're doing at DCA. I've started half a dozen patients on it, but all within 3 weeks, so it's too early to see where it's going. We've got enough indications that it can be given safely. We've worked out what the best dosing regimes is. Now we just have to do the time. And I mean, I've been watching, it's probably one of the most interesting sort of experiments I've done in what I consider a very interesting life. And if you can hold your breath for 6 weeks waiting for the result, that's what I've been doing. We'll see, but I'll certainly keep you informed on it. The fellow in the brown shirt, yeah, had it.
So the question, do you think there's a place for cannabis in the prevention of cancer?
You have to yell it out.
Do cannabinoids prevent cancer?
Okay, do cannabinoids prevent cancer? You know, there's different levels of evidence. The only really strong evidence, interestingly enough, to answer that question comes from the US government. They actually commissioned Professor Donald Tashkin, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago now, to prove that smoking pot caused aerodigestive cancer. So he was given a wad of money. He said, go and prove that pot causes cancer. And he did a 3-year study, and by all accounts he's a very meticulous epidemiologist, and he did a very thorough study. And at the end of it, the conclusion was pot smokers had 30% less cancer generally. Right? I mean, that's hard evidence from the US government. From what I gather, they were hysterical when he published and demanded that he take it off the NIH website, but it's back on Donald Tashkin, right? The other things, and I think there's much bigger effects, so it has a general effect. But what's that based on? It's based on, firstly, the inherent pharmacology of cannabis, which is certainly protective, especially if it's got CBD in it. But there's also a big substitution effect. Like alcohol, especially at higher doses, is a class 1 carcinogen. right? Pot smoking can substitute for alcohol, and that's been clearly demonstrated in Colorado, where the rate of fatal traffic accidents, does everyone know this? Fatal traffic accidents, domestic violence and suicide have all come down very substantially in Colorado since recreational pot came in. So the effect on cancer is not only a direct protective effect, but removing other more harmful things. That's the way I interpret it.
Just a question on another note. I spoke to somebody recently, and he said his wife had been injured in an accident, and she had some sort of nerve damage. Anyway, he said she tried absolutely everything, and nothing worked apart from this. And he said that when she got on this, her whole life changed.
Okay, but I mean, who's going to argue? Neuropathic pain is one of the key indications for medical cannabis, like intractable epilepsy, neuropathic pain. They're the front runners. I mean, you'd have to be a complete idiot, you know, ignoring hundreds of studies, especially on neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is pain from damaged nerves. Specifically, it responds very poorly to opioids. Right, and then you're left with things like Lyrica and pregabalin and things like that. Then they put you on antidepressants. So, yeah, I mean, who's arguing? Is that a statement? Yeah, it works great in neuropathic pain.
For back pain, because I got a disc damage myself from a car accident, is it best to take the THC, or would you need the...
Listen, everyone in this bloody field wants to be an expert, and what I say is the only expert for you is you, right? In the future, what we want to be able to do, and what we're getting closer and closer towards doing now, I mean, comparing to what we used to do some years ago, you know, we can now have some high THC, we can have CBD dominant 3-to-1, 1-to-1, we can have THCB, and we basically cycle the patients through different cannabises and find what suits them, right? But there's no clear and easy guidelines, but I mean, as a rule, depending on what I'm doing, you know, if it's predominantly pain, you start with more CBD dominant. You know, predominantly neuropathic, it may be 1-to-1. It depends, you read the situation, there's no hard and fast rules yet. And also I like to negotiate with the person, what's their prior experience with cannabis, and give them testing things. Because there's a huge response difference between different people. You know, you give someone an oil and the same dose, oh mate, I was out of it for days, the other one said, gee, it didn't have any effect at all. You know, I've given parents a teaspoon of their children's epileptic medicine and they said they were shit-faced for 12 hours, yet the kid was playing on the floor. You know, it just depends where you're up to, where your whole system is up to. It's an issue today as CBD sedating or stimulating. It does appear to be a homeostatic factor. Right, so if you're too high, it brings you down. If you're too low, it brings you up. It seems like that. Right, but there's so many other variables, it's hard to say. The thing with cannabis, because of its safety, we try it. What we want, you know, in a lot of the states in America, they have dispensaries. So you walk into a lounge room and there might be 20 or 30 big jars of pot, each with its colourful name, and more importantly, a list of the ingredients. What the overall percentage is, what the THC, what the CBD, whatever else they've got in there. And just let the patients try it for a month. Right? And in no time at all, you'll quickly find out where the MS patients are going, where the spinal patients are going. Right? We've got our own impressions, but we just don't have enough treated patients with cannabis that we have a detailed fingerprint of, because the government of New South Wales and presumably elsewhere have gone to great lengths to stop us getting access to analytical equipment for a number of reasons. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you say more about vitamin C? Because vitamin C, you know, in the medical literature about anti-cancer, you say it's not very good.
Well, when I say not very good, I say my experiences have been generally negative. Right? These are my experiences. I've followed many patients who've had vitamin C. Now, they were having it about once a week, and the doctors were charging, you know, $200, sometimes $300 a dose, and they were getting between 20, 30, 40, sometimes up to 60 grams a day. And the cancers weren't going away. So I decided to do my own trials. I thought, I wonder if they're just underdosing these people. So we made great effort to get the intravenous vitamin C. That's the first problem. And there's only one laboratory making it, and they've just sort of jacked the price up into astronomical levels. So something like 30 grams of intravenous vitamin C, which should cost you about $1, fine, by the time you package it maybe $10, it's like $100, and the price is probably going to go up further, so there's that. But I was giving 90 grams and repeating it and things like that, and I saw tumour progression while they were on treatment, right? Now, having said that, I don't want to dismiss the importance of vitamin C as an essential nutrient, but the role is to be constantly saturated. And this is something that's really interesting, and I didn't know until a few years ago also. There is no point in taking massive doses of oral vitamin C because there's a mucosal block. So if you take, say, 5 grams a day, which is adequate, especially if you supplement with a healthy vitamin C-rich diet, and you're not under unusual metabolic stress, your body will saturate to about 300 micrograms a litre in your serum. If you take 30 grams a day, 6 times that or more, the body doesn't go any higher. There's a very definite maximum level you can achieve with oral. That's why the intravenous was proposed, because you get much higher levels. And let me say this, if I'm treating someone with a serious viral illness and I have access to intravenous vitamin C, or a bacterial one for that matter, I'll certainly use it as an antibiotic and antiviral, and I'll expect very good results from it. But as an anti-cancer agent, I've done my dash on that. I just didn't get enough encouragement to have me want to continue. Like, I lost 3 out of 3 patients on the treatment that progressed, all of them. So, why would I bother?
Is that because they were using just vitamin C, or were you using other treatments sort of concurrently?
It's a bit of a mishmash, but yeah, they've all been multiply treated with all sorts of things. Right? It's not a clear, proper test, but nor is there any clear biochemical reason that it should work. See, most people think they say it's an antioxidant. In the body, intravenously, it's a pro-oxidant. It's just, there's no actual credible reason why it should work against cancer. Right? And the indications, as I said, I've seen plenty of patients treated with it, and it hasn't turned the corner in any of them. Right? Oh, gee, I wish it did work. I'm not against it, right? I wish it did work.
I've just heard from other sources that kind of levels of 60 grams and above in the space of an hour actually turns into hydrogen peroxide in your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not actually an antioxidant.
It's a pro-oxidant. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But boy, it's a bugger against viral and bacterial diseases. It's an important part of the treatment for that. So it's got a place, but yeah, I'm not using it in cancer anymore.
Yeah. Laetrile doesn't work either.
What?
Laetrile, you wouldn't recommend Laetrile either.
Again, see, okay, the question was, what's the place of laetrile? Apricot kernels, people call it B17, things like that. I went through that phase in the 90s, I have to say, and I didn't treat a lot of patients, but we used some in fairly high oral doses, and once again, it's only a handful of patients, and including even injectable laetrile from Germany, it just had the same impact as vitamin C, it just didn't seem to cut it. The whole laetrile story seems to come because the Hunzers have 1 apricot seed a day and they don't get cancer, but they live in paradise and walk 10 miles a day, and give me a break. It's sort of wishful thinking, right?
Hi there, Andrew. I'm just wondering if you've heard anything at all, or in your experience seen anything about vitamin C interfering with cannabinoid treatment. I read some early research papers several years ago that suggested that taking vitamin C alongside cannabinoids might drop the efficacy of any treatment. Yeah,
you can say that. It depends what you mean by vitamin C. Oh, sorry, the question was, does taking vitamin C reduce the efficacy of cannabis treatment? That was the question. Now, the first thing that you have to answer is, what are you treating, right? Are you treating for pain control or cancer, or what are you treating? That's the first thing. The next thing is, how are you giving the vitamin C as an acute high dose or a loading dose over a long period of time? There's things like that. I think that came from the fact that when people are a bit too high, say that they're greening out, if you give them an orange juice or something, you can bring them down a bit. But how do you interpret that? My attitude is that part of that green out is the fact that they're metabolically stressed because they don't have enough vitamin C. It just returns them to normality, right? Being spaced out and unable to concentrate and string your words together isn't proof of efficacy. And if vitamin C reduces that, it's not proof of lack of efficacy, right? So you've got to be careful there. I really feel not, but how can you say that? There's just one guy at the back with the hat.
Thank you. My name is Peter Crawford. I'm in the respiratory advice.
Respiratory which?
TGA.
what I wanted to ask you, is there any papers published in relation to cannabis used in respiratory benefit? The reason I asked that, I've redesigned this product to take a inhalation for respiratory benefit, but I cannot get past the government block at the moment because they keep saying to me, where is the clinical evidence? Now, I've got export markets for this back into Colorado, in the States. This product registered to TGA as a lung exerciser, but every time I go to Canberra, it's a complete brick wall. I can't go any further.
I gave a talk here, I think last year, called pharmacofascism, and exercise is state power. This is what it is. They're not interested in getting medicine. Now, if your question is, does cannabis have a positive effect on airways? Back in the 1930s, they used to sell cigarettes de joy in Queensland as an asthma cure. And there's no doubt that various cannabinoids can positively impact on airways reactivity. Things like that. I don't know if it should be a frontline treatment in airways disease, but it's certainly not associated with emphysema if it's used without tobacco. But there's no loss of respiratory function in exclusive pot smokers. There's a lot of evidence on that.
It's mainly to treat a variety of COPD conditions, including asthma, bronchitis, and emphysema. It was originally designed to treat cystic fibrosis.
Yeah. Now look, it's likely, especially if it contains both THC and CBD are both antioxidants, CBD probably more so. Things like CF and emphysema and COPD, they're all basically inflammatory diseases. So at least theoretically, inhaling an anti-inflammatory agent into the diseased organ may well help, but I mean, I can't comment significantly on that. You want to ask?
One more, in regards to the CBD, because there's two types, you can decarboxylate or you can raw.
Just ask the question again, mate. Yeah.
I just want to know if you know the difference between raw and using like a CBD raw or decarboxylated, whereas raw would be more antioxidant not being cooked.
Yeah, that's a big question. The question is, what's the place of decarboxylation in cannabis therapeutics? And at this stage, I have to give a big don't know, right? Luckily, it can work both ways, and it's something we have to work out as we go. For instance, if I usually go through a procedure, and do you all know what decarboxylation? I'll define it, basically. You have a cannabinoid, say a THC or a CBD. When it's in the plant, it has an acid group, a COOH group, called a carboxyl group, attached to it. And that's called THCA, and it has significantly less psychotropic effect than carboxylated THC. And that's the rationale behind smoking. Now, whether the therapeutic effect changes with decarboxylation is a big question, and there's competing theories. My impression is, and what I prefer, say, for children with epilepsy, is I usually extract under 60 degrees, and when our stuff's being tested, the majority of it is not decarboxylated. Bearing that in mind, we usually store the oil in the fridge to stop it gradually decarboxylating over time as well. Having said that, I'd certainly be open to the possibility that some kids respond better to heated oils, just as some respond better to CBN. This is something you have to work out, because we're dealing with really heterogeneous groups. So when I approach a child, for instance, I'll always start with non-decarboxylated, raw basically product that's just been sonicated. We'll do a dose escalation on maybe 1-to-1, or if we've got a 3-to-1 CBD, we'll do a dose escalation on that. If we don't get the results we're after with that, then we'll try a decarboxylated oil and do the same titration. So you have to actually do it with each one. Right? So I haven't got a definitive answer. You need to go through like hundreds of patients for that to sort of settle out, but for now we just try. Starting, for instance, if I was going to start with someone with, say, terminal cancer and massive pain, you'd go much more for the heated oils, right? So it's horses for courses, right? But at the end of the day, it comes down to what the patient finds the most useful, and the subjective response is really a very broad spread. Yeah.
Could you give us an update on your cannabis and kiddies with epilepsy?
The question was what's happening with cannabis and epilepsy. Good. We introduced CBD genetics into this country only about 3 years ago, And at that stage, we only had a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, and that's the oil that we've been using. Recently, by the good grace of a very, very experienced horticulturalist that donated his services, we've actually pulled that particular plant apart. Remember that they often cross from different ones, pulled it apart, and now we've got a 3-to-1, a Z7 with a 3-to-1 CBD ratio, and we've also got a plant from Colorado with a 3-to-1 CBD ratio. I'm just putting those oils out now, and again I'll be watching as to whether we get an enhanced response by having a slightly dominant CBD rather than a 1-to-1. I've certainly had plenty of evidence now that if I've got to keep control on a 1-to-1 and we add THC, you can often lose control altogether. There does seem to be a sensitivity. There does seem to be a sensitivity with just giving THC medicines in that the effect wanes over time. Not in everyone. There's the odd kid that'll just go on almost nothing, just the smell of an oily rag almost. But a lot of the children that I've seen have been treated with THC tinctures initially and got a good result, but over 3 or 4 weeks the result just faded away. What we found with the CBD content responders, there's no diminution of the response. They generally stay stable on it unless something else develops. So it's still exciting times, but the big issue is we're not touching a fraction of the kids we need to. Right? You know, I'm only really treating about 20 kids because that's all the pot I've got. It's pathetic.
With knowing what you know about the body and what you do, what is your personal diet?
There's a theoretical diet and then there's a practical diet. The things that I consider are useful for good health. Firstly and foremost, you've got to have a good attitude to life, and you've got to have a meaning and a purpose in your life. I don't sound like a cliche, but that's really number one. Then you've got to drink, you've got to breathe right. Then you've got to drink water that doesn't have fluoride in it. I presume most people here are already avoiding fluoride. Is anyone not? Oh, what? Great, there's hope.
This is Nimbin.
Yeah. Okay, for instance, I like to start the day with a fresh citrus juice. So I'd squeeze a nice big glass of whatever citrus that I had and throw in 5 grams of vitamin C. Take a zinc taste test from the chemist. You can just do a taste test to see if you're short of zinc. If you are, supplement that because that's a very important one. We also have an iodine supplement that goes in because even though you're avoiding fluoride, the fluoride and the bromide that are ubiquitous in our environment seriously interfere with your thyroid function. So there are a few mineral supplements I recommend until you're backed up with it, right? So if you've moved from, say, Redfern to here and you've been drinking the tap water, then you take relatively more iodine until you flush out the fluoride and things like that. A vegetable juice is good in the middle morning. Instead of having a bloody croissant or something like that, go and have a big carrot and beetroot and celery juice or something like that with some ginger in it. For lunch, people have to have raw foods, right? They're just not. I'm starting to want people to get like baby spinach leaves, things like that, because they're really fresh. Even from Woolworths, which generally I wouldn't recommend you go to, but the baby greens are fresh things, right? And they've still got a lot of the vitality in them. And we're now using a special dressing made of hemp seed and flaxseed oil. All this will be put out on the net soon enough. It's really a vegan version of the old Woodward protocol. Most people have heard of the Woodward protocol, which you use a cream cheese sort of thing with flaxseed oil. Well, we found many limitations in that protocol, so we've reworked it using hemp seed instead of the quark, and it works really well. So basically a raw salad, colourful, rainbow, with a hemp seed and flaxseed oil dressing, that's your lunch. Right? Then you might have an apple or 2 in the afternoon, and then vegetables of some sort, again with some hemp seed and flaxseed dressing, and a bit of fish if you want, or egg or something like that, that sort of stuff. Have things, processed things, very rarely, less than 2 days a week. And things like that.
Hemp seed oil and flaxseed oil, or hemp seed?
Hemp seed and flaxseed oil, and that's a really big point, and I'll tell you why.
You mean hemp seed, the seed, not the oil?
No, that's a big point, and I'll just quickly go through why I said that and why we're recommending that when people make the dressing, firstly with the hemp seed, and we're happy to announce by next year we've got a factory now operating in Coolum that's been upgraded, and we should have a more or less continuous supply of Australian grown and processed hemp seed by next autumn. Right? There's a sort of a little tantalising trickle coming out of the factory at the moment, but everything's still being tuned up. The issue with hemp seed is a wonder food, and there's no doubt about that. And I think it's just as important to the healing process as the cannabis medicines, and they work synergistically at different levels in the body. Hemp seed has, this is really important to understand, it's not difficult either. Hemp seed has an ideal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. You should have 1 part of 3 to 3 parts of 6 to keep your body in balance, and hemp seed's got that. It's also got all the mineral and vitamin B cofactors to utilise that omega-3, right? Trouble is, most of us in this society have already a 3 to 6 ratio that's way out of balance. In some of the measured studies in the US on what they call the SAD diet, the Standard American Diet, it can be 1 to 10, and then they end up with blood pressure and osteoarthritis and all these chronic inflammatory diseases up to and including cancer. The idea of mixing the flaxseed, I don't like to use hemp seed oil. If you press the hemp seed and have the hemp seed oil, firstly there's a rancidity issue. As soon as you press any reactive oil, unless you look after it, and that can include freezing and storing in the fridge and things like that, it loses its value very quickly and becomes rancid. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you have the hemp seed oil, you miss out on the cofactors that are so necessary to utilise. Right? The reason we add the flaxseed oil, and it can't be any flaxseed oil, this is the trouble. You talk about things and they're just words, like people say, oh, I had some Reiki mushrooms, I had this. It just depends on the quality as much as anything. So if I say flaxseed oil, by that I mean we contact our patients to go straight to the factory, the stuff's made and sent straight up to them, stored in the freezer and dispensed out of the fridge. That's how you have to look after it. You go and get something from the shelves of Coles or Woolworths, it's only good for rubbing on your furniture. Because I tried the flaxseed oil, it didn't work. You know, it's gone really superficial. There's no sort of depth of intelligence or anything like that. But if we combine the hemp seed with the flaxseed oil, we get all the cofactors, but an elevated omega-3, because flaxseed oil is unique with chia and flax, have a 2 to 1 omega-3 to 6. They're the only 2 substances that have an inverted ratio, have more 3 than 6, and therefore they're really useful for correction.
Why not use the flaxseed put through your coffee grinder instead of using oil?
You can do that if you want, but there's an argument that contains anti-nutritional. Oh, right, the question was why not just use hemp? Sorry, use flaxseed instead of flaxseed oil. You can in desperation if you don't have it, but you normally have to eat a lot of the flaxseed to get that amount of oil that we want you to have, and there are anti-nutritional factors and things like that, but it can be used. I'm not against it. That's, yeah. Is that it? Oh.
Getting back to your discussion on science, has there been any research or any evidence to show that fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue are in fact metabolic disorders?
What was the first one?
Going back to your discussion on science, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, are any research into that as far as being a metabolic disorder?
There is increasing evidence that aging is a metabolic disorder, and you age with your mitochondria. Right? Now, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue are firstly a heterogeneous group of disorders. By that I mean there's not one chronic fatigue syndrome. I mean, there might be one who's fatigued with Lyme's disease, there might be one with undiagnosed autoimmune disease. So it's just a ragbag collection of people with the same symptom. Do you hear what I'm saying there? It's not I view it, especially the chronic pain states, as a case of unquenched oxidative stress rather than a primary metabolic failure. Right? They're not unrelated because as you're under oxidative stress, a lot of the impact's on your mitochondria. So they would have a role in the pathogenesis, but you focus more on the inflammatory side of things as a primary insult. And the damage to the mitochondria is a secondary one. That's the way I interpret it at this stage. But there's a lot unknown about chronic fatigue syndrome. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can do on that. Reflects a state of knowledge, I think. Oh, no, too much. Okay.
Hello, Dr. Andrew. I spoke to you over the telephone maybe about 6 weeks ago, and it was about my daughter situation. And I also described to you that basically like dual diagnosis because her epileptic medication was so high. That her epileptic medication was so enormously high for so long that, in my opinion, from what I've read, the toxicity throws them into mental health, which is what had happened to her, and then they developed psychosis because of the high levels of the medication. And I did get some stuff from you, and I did say to you, I was bringing her down on her, the psychotropic drugs, the risperidone, the Seroquel. So it's not an even study, and I understand that. But for the first 2 weeks, our heads basically just spun. We said, is this what we're really seeing? There was such a dramatic effect to her, but as her psychotropic drugs kept coming down.
This might be interesting. Why don't you come forward and take the microphone? So, because I couldn't repeat that all at once.
My main question for you was, because she's been so high on epileptic medications, 35 years old now, but from birth, that I started saying, and she'd been flipped over into mental health with psychosis of Nutsville, where no one then wanted to look after her. People were going, oh my God. So going from really lovely into mental health. And I said, and so I've gone along with that, and then I thought I'd better do something about this. And I was talking to you about it over the phone, and I thought, you said to me, well, we'll just get her off some of her epileptic medications, which I was doing, and I've got, she's off Keppra. She's down to 200 milligrams of Tegretol instead of 800 milligrams, and she's just started last night halving her topromax. So that's a big dosage if you really want to add them up for donkey's years. But at the same time, I started taking her off her mental health tablets, Seroquels, risperidones, which...
Why do you call those poisons mental health drugs?
I wish we'd had this conversation 20 years ago. I was just doing what I knew. But so basically what happened to her was I started, because I had such an unbelievable response, only for 2 weeks, and even her blue care ladies and where she goes every day, I said to them, because I was going back to the doctor, is it minor, major, I can't think of the top one, or miracle. Anyway, they gave me major. It was a major improvement. Everyone noticed it like that. Where before that, they'd almost been wanting to get her out. Could someone else take her over? So my point is, I then, because I was so elated, started taking her off some of her Seroquels and risperidones, which then creates a rebound effect, and they get worse because the brain's screaming out to them. And my question to you is, with psychosis, there's a lot of literature saying that the CBD oils help with the psychosis, which is the one, and that was my question. I want to know what you're going to tell me about the psychosis.
Well, yeah, that's a complicated question, complicated case. I mean, you've got so many things happening all at once. The antipsychotic effect of CBD, I mean, that was demonstrated at 1,500 milligrams a day. Right? Now, if we buy that sort of CBD, say from Charlottesville in America, that's like $200 a dose. Right? So that's where it gets awkward to talk about the antipsychotic effect of cannabis. Partly it is rebound and disturbed chemistry. See, I feel a lot of mental health issues, and I've seen this in CAS and things like that. I mean, you can't spend a week on a Diet Coke and sort of, McDonald's and things and have a balanced view of life. Right? And a lot of these unhinged... right? No. But, I mean, just the medications you're on can upset your metabolism as well. There's no doubt about that. And the seizures too. Right? I mean, I've confronted bad addicts, but a lot of other people have too. The seizures are an emergency, but they're just brushing away as though it's not important. Right? And it's a real tragedy. Yeah, what can I say? It's...
Psychosis, because we didn't speak about that.
Yeah. I have to do it one-to-one.
Yeah.
Because you have to actually define what you mean by psychosis. That's complicated. Look, I've learned to not give fine from the hip advice because of the complexity of most cases that come to us. We really do have to sort of think things through. We have to professionally. So yeah.
But it has been a life changer.
Yeah.
In as much as the humanity has come back.
Yeah. And I mean, that's only the beginning of the healing journey too. I mean, we have, and not only we, I mean, there's a group of compassionate people all around. We've changed people's lives and also saved this bloody country an enormous amount of money. I mean, kids like Disha, she spent like 100 days a year in hospital, many of those in intensive care. The bill was like $200,000-300,000 a year. She hasn't visited one in the last 2 years. Right? It's, yeah, what can you say?
Great work,
Yeah, okay.